Hi, I'm Randy Robison. I'm here at Life Today, and I have Ann Voskamp with me, and glad to have her back. She's got a new book called The Broken Way. Well, tell me the release date on this.
October 25th.
October 25th, 2016. So if you're watching this before then, pre-order it. Go be ready and be one of the first to get it. Most of you are seeing this after that, and if you've missed it, you need to go back and get it. So good to have you again here.
Oh, grace to be here.
Tell me a little bit about The Broken Way, what you're addressing.
I think after I wrote 1,000 Gifts, and 1,000 Gifts was really, again, gathering around the Lord's Supper. Jesus took the bread, gave thanks. And it was about counting 1,000 things I loved, 1,000 ways I've been blessed, and really stepping into hearing people's stories of how they were blessed over the last 5 years, but also hearing people's deep brokenness, the pain and suffering that they were facing. How did they give thanks in really hard, dark places? And coming back to that Lord's Supper, what does Jesus do after he gives thanks? He gives thanks, he breaks the bread, and he gives it. And I wanted to step into, how do you live with your one broken heart? What is the answer to pain and suffering in the world? How do you live an abundant life in a world that feels broken? And in coming to the place of, I wanted shape to my days. I wanted to know, how do you shape your life into abundance in a world of brokenness? And if the dare in 1,000 Gifts was, could I give thanks for 1,000 things? The dare in that I stepped into in The Broken Way is every morning taking that same pen that I'd written out 1,000 things I was grateful for, taking that pen and penning a cross on my wrist, a shape that I wanted my days to have. That cross is really a symbol of brokenness, of weakness, of suffering, yet in the upside down kingdom, it's a symbol of power and transformation and resurrection and abundance. So The Broken Way really was taking this dare to live cruciform, to live broken and given out into the world in the midst of my own brokenness, that I didn't have it all together, that sometimes we think we can only be given out into the world once we think we're perfect, once we think we have it together, and realizing that no, deep communion, deep wholeness, deep healing happens when I'm vulnerable enough to share my own brokenness with other people.
Was the impetus for writing the book directly out of some brokenness that you had experienced?
Deep brokenness. As a teenager, after the death of my sister was killed in front of my mother and I. She was run over by a vehicle in a laneway in our farmyard and killed. My mom was hospitalized in psych wards all through my teenage years. I cut all through my teenage years, and seeing sometimes that deep brokenness, the Lord heals it, and we still struggle with what do I do with it, and realizing that if I could be vulnerable enough with my own brokenness and share those broken parts of my story, the things I want to hide, the things I don't want people to know about, I think that the shortest distance between two hearts is when we share our brokenness, when we share the places where we feel maybe the most vulnerable. I think we look at culture and society right now, we're desperate to avoid suffering and pain.
Well, sure.
Any way we can escape it, avoid it. And I think stepping into The Broken Way was, how do I sit with my own brokenness and not turn away from it? How do I look at the brokenness in the world and not try to run away from it, not try to turn my face from it, and not being afraid? I think throughout the book, the mantra I'm using over and over and over again, sitting with, is never be afraid of broken things. Christ is redeeming everything. And I really realized, Randy, every single fear that I experienced in my whole life came back to that I was afraid of something that was broken. And realizing I didn't need to be afraid of the broken things anymore. Christ on that cross, he steps into the suffering. He lives in the suffering places. He wants to meet us in the broken places, the places where people are starving, the places where people are parched, the places where people are hurting. That's where we meet Christ, so we can't be afraid of the broken places. If we'll step into those places that look like death, there's resurrection in those places.
Is there ever any end to the brokenness?
I think when we realize that brokenness can make abundance, that there is no change, there's no growth without change, There's no change without suffering. And suffering comes from wounded places, but wounds can birth wisdom. I think if we can sit with brokenness and realize that all of the brokenness, all of the broken places in our hearts are broken hearts. All of those broken pieces do make abundance, and I don't think we need to be. I think yes, on the other side of heaven, the brokenness ends, but this side of heaven, there is going to be brokenness. But trust that, just like a seed has to break open.
Right.
It's going to grow a crop if I'll sit with it.
Yeah.
If I allow God to take the time it's going to take to water that broken seed. The soil needs to be broken. The sky needs to break open to rain. Sit with the brokenness, and there'll be great yield in your yieldedness.
The number one reason that people don't believe in God is pain and suffering.
Pain and suffering, Randy, yes.
They ask, how can a good God allow
Exactly.
such pain? Do you address that at all?
Yeah, I think, number one, lots of times we don't know the answers to pain and suffering at all. But we do know that whatever the reason is, it has to be a profoundly transformative, necessary reason, because God himself enters that suffering. God himself is willing to feel the brokenness. God himself cries with us in the brokenness. God himself, history really is the tears of God. He's willing to sit in the brokenness and not escape the brokenness. So whatever the reason is for the suffering, God himself is willing to experience it. So it has to be worthwhile. And number two, I think the answer to suffering, sometimes we don't want an explanation from God as much as we want an experience with God, that he comes and he's with us in the brokenness. The book really explores that. I believe that good brokenness breaks bad brokenness. That the good brokenness of being broken and given, that we reach out and break ourselves and give a bit of ourselves to someone else in their bad brokenness, that breaks the bad brokenness. That if we will come alongside and show compassion to people in breaking, hurting places, it's more than anything, we want someone to be with us in the pain, with us in the fire. And I think the compassion and the witness, I mean, God himself says his name is Emmanuel, God with us. Sometimes more than someone plucking us out of what that fire may be, a refiner's fire. It may do something really beautiful in our life that's ridiculously painful at the time. But having someone sit with us, and I think if we as a community, as a culture, as a body, as a kingdom people will come alongside and say, I'm not afraid of brokenness. I have compassion. Compassion means co-suffering. I will co-suffer with you in this brokenness. I think that heals suffering in very profound, necessary ways.
You're touching on something that, when Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are.
So true.
The word blessed, makarios in the Greek, also translated as happy.
The lucky ones.
Happy,
the
right.
blessed ones, the happy ones.
So blessed are those who suffer, who mourn.
Who mourn,
How
can
can that be possible? The second half of the verse says, for they shall be comforted.
Totally
So I think you're
comforted.
touching on something very important, the comfort we offer to others.
And I think sometimes we think brokenness is the end of something, and when brokenness can be the beginning of something that's very abundant, very rich, that suffering doesn't have to be a meaningless waste of our lives, but a meaningful way through our lives. That Jesus invites us into a deep communion with him. How? To participate in the sufferings of Christ, to participate in the sufferings in the world. Give a glass of water to the least of these, to those who are hurting. And what do you have? You give it to Christ himself. There's deep communion in the broken places with broken people. And us sharing our own brokenness with others allows there to be a deep communion where Christ can meet it. I think so often in the church, we feel like we need to be perfect. We wear perfect masks, that we have it all together. And if we can say to each other, I'm broken, that allows Christ to be seen, the cross to be seen in ways that can't be seen when we're wearing masks. And I think we should only trust leaders who are limping, leaders who've been broken, who know what it's like to lean into the cross, to have the cross carry them alone.
What's the website for the book?
Brokenway.com.
Brokenway.com. Be sure to check it out. You can also see more of Ann when she talks about this on 2 programs on Life Today. If you don't see them on the air, you can always catch them online at lifetoday.org. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the subscribe button because we want to let you know about all the great videos from Life Today.